And I'm going to welcome you to this month's Etc. talk. So we have these every month, and it's a wonderful opportunity for all of us that are here in the draw community and more broadly to be able to hear a little bit more about a particular artist's work. We always try and link it with our terms and our termly focus this particular period. So in spring is planographic printmaking. So we're particularly looking at the work of several different planographic printmakers, not wanting that to limit them, of course. But today we're very lucky to be joined by Jemma Gunning, who is an artist, printmaker, and maker more broadly. And I really enjoyed that actually, Gemma, as part of your introduction. So making is important to you. In fact, could I switch over to your screen and just say hi?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello. It feels like that's a bit dirty. Yeah, when I said maker, I make all the time, whether that is prints, sauerkraut, I don't know, jam. It's in my bones, I guess. I'm yeah, fundamentally a maker. That's what I do. Um,
Excellent. But we're going to be talking about your printmaking in particular today. And is that the kind of core of your main practice as a visual artist?
Yeah, I guess my practice is rooted in drawing, and I've been drawing since I was very little, and found drawing on my undergraduate. No, sorry, found printmaking on my BA. So I did a BA in drawing, and then we had an induction into printmaking, and that was it. I was hooked. I guess it's like the sound of the rollers and the weight of the press and the smells, and that was about 15, maybe longer years ago. And so now, yeah, I predominantly work in, I would say, etching, and I used to do loads of lithography, but kind of less so now. Mainly because I stopped working at the university in Bristol, so I don't have access to it quite as readily. But I make a lot of monoprints. That's how I kind of kick off any project that I start working on.
And is it right that you co-run Bristol Print Collective as well?
Yeah, so I set up Bristol Print Collective with two other printmakers 9 years ago, and there's now six of us in the collective. And we run pop-up workshops around Bristol, but also like international, well, not international. Well, we did a workshop in Denmark, which was quite fun. But we do a lot mainly in the southwest, and yeah, we also will be moving into a shared, me and Vicky, who I set it up with, we will be moving into a shared studio at Centre Space in the centre of Bristol in May, which will then be our kind of like headquarters, if you like, where we'll be running workshops and courses. Currently I'm in a studio outside of Bristol, so it's a bit of a slog getting people to kind of go into the countryside. Um, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. I've just shared a link in the chat as well if anyone's interested in clicking through. But thank you, Gemma. It's so lovely to have you here as well. So thanks for agreeing to do this talk.
No worries.
Is it okay if I switch into the slideshow and we can start to have a chat about some of your work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Assuming that I know nothing about printmaking as well, Gemma, I mean, talk to me as if I'm an idiot. Tell me about these images here. How are they made?
Okay, so I guess I'll start by saying that my work is, I guess it primarily involves exploring spaces that are in a state of flux. So whether that is a landscape, whether that's abandoned buildings. For the last 10 years, I've been drawn to these abandoned spaces. And whenever I start a project, I always start with monoprinting. And for me, it's a way of breaking down an image tonally, but also visually in terms of mark making. And for those of you who aren't familiar with monoprinting, the way I make these, it's referred to as subtractive monoprinting. So I ink up a sheet of, I use aluminium, like a really lightweight. It's an old lithographic printing plate. So I just use the reverse side of it. And once I've inked up the matrix fully, I then use rags and brushes to reveal the white spaces. And I guess it's kind of revealing layers, if you like. of the spaces that I'm recording. Um, and I guess the reason why I'm drawn to monoprinting in particular is it is the immediacy of it, and it's the spontaneous quality it has. And I got into monoprinting from going to Somerset House, purely to go to the toilet. And as I left the toilet, so these set of John Virtue monoprints on the wall, and they were kind of semi-abstract scenes of London. And I was really drawn to mainly the monochrome and the black and white and the kind of expressive qualities that they contained. And so when I was on my degree, I went back to the technician in the print room and said, "Oh, could you please show me how to make a monoprint? I've seen these in London," and they showed me, and that was it. I was hooked. So I basically spent most of my degree just monoprinting and kind of, I guess, starting to develop my own visual language in using this tool. Which then these then now, back then I was just making monoprints, but now they lend themselves, or they're kind of, I see them as almost drawings, kind of working out work, like I was saying, working out kind of tone and composition for etchings or stone lithographs. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, it's kind of, and then to get like, I use traditional oil-based inks and use a lot of white spirit, and kind of kind of the splatting, the kind of the broken up marks are what you get from kind of flicking white spirit very carefully, making sure it doesn't go anywhere else. But, yeah.
And you work these up in the studio, presumably after you've been out on location. Was that right?
Yeah, so I draw on location. I always take a sketchbook. I always take a camera. It depends, because a lot of the time I'm going into spaces which obviously they're out of bounds, but I quite like going into them anyway. And therefore, if it's a situation where I don't feel safe, then I'll just snap and go, and then get back to the studio and do drawings from the photographs and make monoprints and then make etchings or lithographs. If it's a situation where I've been commissioned to record a building, then I'll sit happily and just draw, and then make those. Then it goes, so drawing, monoprinting, and then either a lithograph or an etching. That's kind of like my working methodologies.
And what are these three different locations here?
So we've got, the top right one is from a residency that I did 3 years ago in the Peak District called the Lodge Project. And I was basically in Derbyshire in the Peak District for 3 months. And the brief was to record the post-industrial landscape. And it was a funded project, which I had to pinch myself actually to be like, God, I'm getting paid to stay in the Peak District and just to walk and draw. But actually, whilst I was on that residency, I didn't have any printmaking facilities apart from like a tiny press. So I would make kind of small monoprints, but mainly do large drawings and then charcoal drawings, which then translated into monotypes. So that was a really lovely project. And then I had a solo show after that 3 month residency the year after at Worksworth Festival, which I made like lots of drawings, monoprints, ceramics, kind of a real site specific body of work. And then the one below is from the Cornish Alps. So in St Austell in Cornwall is where they extract kind of, it's the biggest china clay pit in Europe. It's absolutely bonkers. And this was a funded project by the Arts Council. So I was awarded a Developing Your Creative Practice grant, and that was to record these clay pits, but then to go and work with Nantgarw China Works in Wales to make a body of work in porcelain, because that's what they're extracting. So it kind of links, because when I was in Derbyshire, in the Peak District, I was really drawn to quarries, because it's heavily mined and heavily quarried for limestone and for lead. And when you're stood inside a quarry, you get to see all these layers of time, and it kind of sparked this interest in quarrying. So then that's how I then got led on to like kind of the China clay pits, because it's like another world. It's bonkers. It's almost like a kind of like moonlight. Um, and then the image on the left-hand side, this is quite a big monoprint. It's one of the biggest I've made, and it's of they used to make the Concorde wings there of the planes. So Concorde wings. So it's a huge kind of big industrial hangar. And when I was there, what I really enjoyed was that I wasn't the only one in this space. There were people, there was like a photographer, there were skaters. So it felt like a shared playground where we were all there for our own reasons. And but we all kind of like you give each other a nod and then you just kind of go about your time. And then so yeah, when I was there, I actually felt, I mean, all of these places I felt safe enough to draw in because I don't know, it just felt very open, um, not guarded. Um, yeah, sorry, I don't know if I've just waffled on there.
No, that was great. That's just what we wanted.
Yeah.
Shall I go on to our next images?
Yeah, yeah.
And so tell me about these.
So these are a set of lithographs. They're all minus the bottom left one. They're all stones. So we've got the top. The top one is a big triptych of an abandoned church in Bristol. Um, that was quite a headache to do because it was the same stone. So I grained it back and then obviously then we're working reverse, checking that would all line up. But again, it was a really fun kind of image to make. And then the one on the right hand side is Mania Noir, which is for anybody that's not familiar with stone lithography, is where you ink up and you process the stone, so it's essentially a black surface, almost like a mezzotint. And then with a series of scrapers and burnishes, again you're revealing the whites in the space. So very much linked to monoprinting and how that can translate into stone lithography very beautifully. And then the bottom left is a plate litho. So I realized about 4 years ago that you could really wonderfully get you could use touche or mark resist and make photo plates, which is a hell of a lot quicker than using stone. It's not as magical as stone, but um touche, so again I'll just describe what touche is to people. It's grease suspended in water, and when you puddle that onto limestone, it creates these contour marks which you can't really get in any other printmaking process, which is why I was drawn originally to making stone lithographs, was this medium. And it's beautiful. It's kind of like tidal marks, and very organic. And yeah, recently I've just discovered that you can, puddle that on mark resist film, which means it's portable. So I can make a lot of drawings in my own studio and then take them to a studio to make the plates. And the bottom left is is part of a bigger, wider body of work, which was working on a commission or a collaboration with a screen printer in Glasgow, and we were working with WWF, Wildlife, not the wrestling, to we were making a body of work that would help people to understand about the Amazon rainforest and the commodities that we use, and that the results of it burning, basically. So a project about deforestation, um, which was actually quite a hard one to be part of, but I learned a lot. And we ended up actually doing a lot of hybrid printing where he screen printed in a glow in the dark ink, and then I did a lithograph on top so that when the lights came off, would turn off, you would see the biodiversity fleeing from the rainforest. um so that was like a really cool kind of way of just pushing my own practice and working in collaboration with somebody else. Um, but I guess what my work in these images just reflecting is that most of my work is about light and kind of revealing the beauty in these dark spaces. Um,
Mhm.
Often they can seem quite somber and dark, but actually there is like kind of life starting to emerge from the scene.
And is your work often free of people, but often responding to a human space?
Yeah, so that they're all um I'll be honest, I can't really draw. I can draw people, but I don't really like drawing people. Um, I find I find just, yeah, abandoned buildings. I guess you can put yourself in the scene as well. So if it's a void of people, then you can kind of imagine yourself in these environments. But the person, they're, I guess in a way they're linked to people, because the reason why these spaces are decaying and maybe falling apart or gone into disrepair is because of displacement of people or economics shifting. And so I guess they are still linked to very much human activity, which is kind of what I'm drawn to and why I enjoy recording them.
Thank you. Shall I hop on to our next images?
Yeah.
So a sudden change of shift and some color.
A sudden shift, yeah. So I I kind of walking is also very important to my practice. And I think when you're a creative person, for me, when I walk, it allows ideas to percolate. And when I don't walk, I kind of get a block and I just know that I need to go outside. And so recently I've been really drawn to recording these spaces. So I always, whenever I go for a walk, I always take a sketchbook and I make kind of like small sketches. But in the summer, I did a residency in Venice, and beforehand, I drove my camper van to Venice via the kind of the French, Swiss, and Italian Alps. And mainly to go, the purpose for that trip was to actually go and see glaciers because they're melting at such a rapid rate. I was like, when will I mean, I probably will get another opportunity, but it feels right to go and kind of hike and kind of witness these spaces that are changing. And I see them still as the same line of thread of the abandoned buildings. There's an echo in the shift of the landscape and the impermanence of the spaces I'm recording. Um, and yeah, I spent a month just kind of like in these spaces, feeling very alive that I was walking and kind of taking in the space, but also quite sad because they are reducing at a rapid rate and they hold a lot of, very much like buildings, they've got a lot of memory in them, and that is slowly eroding. And I think the next slide is kind of keeping up with the printmaking, because I didn't have access to a press when I was away. I took this portable press with me from the Open Press Project, which is run by a guy called Martin in oh, where is he? He's in Germany, Munich, maybe. And I don't know if anyone's heard of the Open Press Project, but you can buy these portable presses from him, and they're really good. They're really sturdy. They print lino, they print dry point, monoprint. And so I was like, wow, when I'm walking, it weighs a kilogram. So it means you can chuck it in your rucksack and just walk. And then I would basically walk, reach a summit, and then make a monoprint. So I was kind of recording my journey through the Alps, monoprinting and drawing, which I've started using now as reference materials for for a body of work for Printfest in May. And yeah, if you go on to the next one, I think the video should play, Jake. Yeah. So again, they're really quick. Again, you don't want to hang around too long in these spaces because the mountains change very rapidly. The environment changes, but you can see, like, I'm drawn to this because of, if you look at how the ice is formed, like all the textures and the kind of cracks, they're just so visually overwhelming. And to try and get that onto paper, that's what I've been doing since I've been home, really. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll make sure I include some links as well when I share the recording of this to the Open Press project as well, because I think the little presses are amazing things, aren't they?
Oh, they're so good. I mean, we use them for workshops. Martin kindly gifted me this one because I said, "Oh, if you gift me one, I'll take it. I'll do a print where no one's done a print before." So it was like, I was like, I can't find anyone that's done a monoprint at like 3,500 feet high. Um, So yeah, that was my challenge in the summer. But like, I need to get up high and then make Martin a really good video of me using his
Excellent.
press. But yeah, they are so handy to have, like just traveling with. I've seen someone use one on an aeroplane before. You know, you can just whip out a little monoprint.
And so for anyone that thinks that printmaking is inaccessible and that they can't do it at home, I mean, you can do it on a mountainside.
You can do it on a mountainside, exactly. We do, as Bristol Print Collective, we do quite a lot of festivals where we use pasta makers. You know, they're like pasta makers 15 quid, or even cheaper if you find it in a charity shop or a car boot sale. And you can make beautiful prints on a pasta maker. You know, we do a festival called like End of the Road where we do printmaking in the woods, and we print with about 3,000 people over the weekend, and we're just making these beautiful long like botanical monoprints. Um, so yeah, I think it's important to realize that you don't necessarily need a big studio to make prints. Obviously, it's handy, but you can make, yeah, lovely stuff just by using portable kit.
It's definitely something that we find in our different terms is that everyone's keen to paint, everyone's keen to draw, but it's much harder to convince people to have a go at printmaking. And I think having things like this is actually really inspiring that it lowers the kind of bar for entry into printmaking. And it can be such an exciting way of discovering new marks, kind of finding a new language of expression. So
Mm. I think that's and also I think because I started my BA as a painter, and printmaking, so monoprinting was almost like that, the kind of the gateway drug, if you like, to printmaking, because it was painterly and very expressive like painting. So I think if you got people who are unsure, you kind of make them do a monoprint, and that might change of their thought process.
and before you know it, they're dragged into etching in no time at
Yeah.
all.
The dark side doing lithographs.
I'm going to hop to our next slide.
So as well as being in the mountains, when I was coming, because so this most of this is in northern, well, this is all in northern Italy, and northern Italy is scattered with lots of, abandoned buildings, and I guess mainly because of it could be to do with like economical shift. The one on the like so the right hand side is an old theme park called Viniland, and that's not far from Venice actually, but again it's this huge space that's completely abandoned. But the lights and the shadows, and when nature's kind of reclaiming the spaces, this is what I really love about abandoned buildings, is the fact that they're very much alive. They're bursting with life. It only takes like a bird to get through a window and drop a seed, and then you've got a whole new ecosystem that will just appear.
Hmm.
Um, and then yeah, so we've got like an old villa in the middle, and that was quite fun to kind of stumble across and explore. And then a set of stairs, which is what the villa was in. Um, So yeah, the sets were in the villa. And again, you got like the ivy coming through the window and then wrapping itself around the balcony. So visually they're wonderful spaces to kind of explore and go to.
And
Um,
I noticed that you've tackled graffiti quite a lot in your work, in your prints. I mean, I guess it's something you come across a lot in these abandoned spaces. Is it something you're interested in, or is it just part of the recording of the space?
I actually really love graffiti and trying to like kind of copy it. I don't know what it is, but I think when you're when there's graffiti in a space, it's almost like you're recording a shared museum, because it's essentially a blank canvas. So people are going in, they're making their mark, and those spaces are continually changing because of people going in, whether it's to do graffiti or to I don't know, to vandalize the space. So I guess for me, when I'm recording it, I know that it's not gonna ever stay the same. It's gonna change from one day to the next. Someone's gonna be in there kind of covering the walls and writing something else. So um yeah, it's kind of capturing that kind of shared gallery, if you like.
Hmm. Cool. Thank you. Shall I hop us through to the next image?
Yeah. So this is the Scuola Grafica in Venice, and for anybody who's looking to go on a residency, I mean, I would highly recommend residencies. I think they're amazing to really kind of gather your thoughts and to experiment with processes, but also to meet like-minded people from all over the world. So the Scuola Grafica is really unique in the fact that it's not an open access studio. It's purely run it's purely operated by international residencies. So when I was working there was someone from Australia, Switzerland, France, Ireland, um, all over really. And so there's this really beautiful dialect and dialogue happening around printmaking, and you get to see how different nations and nationalities make work. And this is like a 200-year-old building, maybe even older actually. Got these beautiful wooden beams and I don't know, they've one maybe like 4 etching presses. And sadly, I went with the intention to just do lithography for a whole month, but they've transitioned to a non-toxic studio, so nitric acid was out the window, um, and everything else that's kind of replaced the old traditional printmaking. It's actually pretty naff. Like for anybody who like loves non-toxic printmaking, that's great, but I think there's a place for it, but what am I trying to say? It's not actually, I don't think it's actually as safe as people make out it to be. When you're using, spray paint and you're using it outside, and that's plastic pollution going into the atmosphere. And anyway, so I had a little bit of a funny time there, but I just made monoprints because I couldn't get the blacks that I wanted, how I would normally get the blacks back home. Um, and so I guess that again, it's a challenge, and when you're going to a new studio and a new working environment, to adapt and change. Knowing that when I get home, I'd have absolute access to my own studio and would be able to make etchings, and use a studio in Bristol called Lemonade Press to make lithographs, which is what I did kind of for 3 months, and when I got home. But as I was saying to you, Jake, I didn't like any of them, so they went in the bin.
Nature of the creative process, right?
Yeah, is that, yeah, you just, I think, yeah, if anyone's interested in printmate in residencies, then this one in Venice is beautiful. I was really fortunate that, so I'm a member of the Royal Society of Painter Printmakers, and I applied to go on a full scholarship. So I got selected last year, and which meant I got free accommodation and free use of the studio. In return, I had to teach, but that was actually really exciting as well, teaching in a foreign place where, people couldn't speak English. So a lot of it was a lot of kind of like, roller action, and which made me then think actually printmaking is a universal language. It's kind of, it's a shared thing all over the world, which is quite magic, really.
Lovely thought.
Mm.
And is our next slide more images from Venice, I think?
I think so. I can't remember what. Yes. So when I was um when I was in Venice, it was actually it's actually quite overwhelming. So I went from the vastness of the mountains and the solitude, and then to this insanely dense city, and it couldn't be more of an extreme shift if I wanted it to be. So um I I found that like kind of the evenings and early mornings were the most inspiring times to go, because for anyone that's not been to Venice, in the summer, I went in September. It's it's like a theme park. It's overrun with tourists, so it can feel quite claustrophobic. So I uh, uh, I guess whenever I start a new project or go to a new place, I do this thing called psychogeography, which basically means meandering the city streets with no purpose in the hope of finding inspiration. And I was drawn to these kind of alleyways and the derelict, kind of the more quiet spaces in the city, which then allows kind of, I guess, more time to draw and reflect. So I did a lot of drawing in the streets, the quiet parts of the streets, um, kind of revealing the layers of that history of the city. there's a particular area called the Arsenali, which is really rich in history, and I was kind of drawn to kind of drawing in that kind of in that area of the city. And then the next slide, I think it's so like the morning and nights basically become my favorite time to explore Venice when the tourists had departed, and it felt like I was going back in time where the streets were very quiet, and there's not a lot of lighting actually in the dark in there's not a lot of street lights, so it does feel like you're going back in time and can feel a bit eerie. But kind of again, I went out and I didn't draw at these times. I kind of took photos, and then back in the studio, I would then um, kind of capture that making monoprints, which maybe the next slide is off. I'm not quite sure. No, it's water. So when I was there, I realized actually the relationship, how Venice has this like really funny relationship with water. So shortly after arriving in Venice, I witnessed flooding firsthand, and that kind of took me back to my time in the Alps, where the very glaciers that I was recording melting were actually causing the streets in Venice to flood. Um, so like Venice is sinking at like an alarming rate of like 1 to 2 millimeters a year, which doesn't sound a lot, but over time that is going to cause it, some issues. Um, so I kind of I kind of started to record the water using monoprinting. And it's I don't know, it's a bizarre kind of thing to witness, because they have sirens that go off for the aqua alta, which means high tide. So it happened quite frequently when I was there. So again, I kind of could see that there was a link between what I was recording in the Alps to what I was seeing in Venice, and then the abandonment on kind of like the north, in the north of Italy. It all kind of like links up in a way.
Hmm.
But what I loved was the skies. I've never experienced skies like it, constantly changing, and the light. It was actually, that time of the morning. It was about 6:30, 7. It's really dramatic and kind of a wonderful time to be out.
With all of these things that you're thinking about as you're making your work, are you intending them to be communicated through the work, or is it just sort of part of your experience of the world to be considering them as you're sort of looking for subjects to print from?
Yeah, I think that's a question that I've been thinking more about recently is, I think it's a quiet nod to a broader and a wider issue that's going on at the moment with, climate change and sea levels rising. And whether that is something that I think I'm still working that out, Jake, is it's actually is it enough just to make work about these scenes, and then to maybe have text that go alongside the work. um yeah, that's something that I'm still kind of exploring and thinking about. um I guess it's kind of like a almost like a repertoire of like of recording and documenting, and hopefully that will spark kind of questions to be around to arise, and conversations to happen.
And I think it's also important, I guess, not to necessarily jump to a conclusion in work that you're trying to communicate, but to have an opportunity to consider something yourself, just as a human being that exists in the world. And as you're making work, it's an opportunity to reflect in itself without necessarily needing to come to a conclusion.
Yeah, I think that's how I've previously have worked. Is I'm drawn to a subject matter, I start making work about it, and then I guess it's always handy to contextualize to see who else is making work, and the reasons behind it. But ultimately you're drawn to I'm drawn to these spaces, I think, because of the sense of movement and the flux, and nothing's permanent and it's constantly changing, and therefore I've got this urge to record it before it kind of disappears, or it changes even further.
Thank you. If I hop to here, I think is this some of the work developed from Venice?
Yeah, so I think these were actually made in the studio whilst I was there. So um these were made, so when I got to Venice, obviously I'd only been the first, when you get to a new studio, you kind of want to start making work. Well, I did, because I hadn't had access to a press for like 4 weeks. So I started to use a lot of the drawings and photos I'd taken in northern Italy to kind of kickstart off the residency. So these are kind of abandoned spaces that I'd come to find on the outskirts of Venice. So yeah, one of them is an old villa, and then the other two images on the middle and the right are actually from an old seminary, which is where they trained priests, and it didn't stay open very long, and now it's completely abandoned, and it's been vandalized, and nature's reclaiming the space, but it's absolutely massive. It's a huge space to walk around. Found loads of wild figs there, which was delicious.
Ooh, yeah.
So, yeah. Um, yeah, and I think the next slide might be what I've made. Oh no, this is again what I've been making since coming back. So it's like two bodies, two streams, two threads, I guess. One is mountains and the other is abandoned buildings, and I kind of half the week do work on one and half the week the other week, just to break it up a little bit. But yeah, again, all monoprinting, to kind of to help ideas generate and to work through. I guess I also make monoprints so that if I get excited over an image, I know that I'll probably get excited over it on an etching plate or a lithographic stone. So
Mhm.
therefore, for me, it's almost like is this worthwhile kind of pushing it and going into another process? That's another reason why I tend to make monoprints as well, like preliminary works.
And so if I go through, this is seeing a whole load of the monoprints in the studio context.
Yeah, so this is now these actually I made all of these in Venice. And I was exploring kind of a bit of color there, so I was using more of like a bronze blue with a black to kind of create this nighttime feeling, which is something I've not really previously explored before. I do use color in like a very loose sense, in that if it's a scene where I want a bit more warmth, then I'll add red or like a sepia to my black ink, and vice versa. If it's a cool scene, then I'll add a bit of blue. But here I was kind of like pushing that and kind of going a bit more in the blue zone. And I guess then for me, it's just interesting to see what images work, what ones don't I want to like take further. And it's all, most of the work I've started to develop are all these ones with the light kind of coming in. So the one with the chair, I've turned it into an etching. The one above it, the monoprint, with the reflections of the pillars in the water, that's now been turned into an etching. So I think it's useful for me to see these kind of prints on the wall, just to see actually what ones do I want to kind of push a bit further and develop into etchings. Yeah. I did also make some like little blizzard books, which is quite fun, kind of with monoprints that are a bit more experimental.
What's a Blizzard book?
A blizzard book is that you don't need to necessarily, it's no stitch, it's no glue, it's just a folded bound, and then you kind of slot all the pages in. So really,
Okay.
yeah, if you're interested in bookbinding or bookmaking, type in blizzard books. It's a really good way of just using old prints almost as a surface to then draw on top of.
Mhm.
Yeah, really nice.
Fantastic. Yeah, that'll be something to look up afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe everyone can show us what they make, blizzard books they make.
I'm going to hop on to the next one.
And so so these are finished etchings that I've made. So you can kind of see how the monoprints are useful for me to make, because it definitely helps me break down that composition and the tone, and the textures as well. Um, so I kind of, when I'm making an etching, I'll use sketches from my sketchbook. I'll use some photographs to get it kind of structurally aligned and kind of and positions, the proportions correct. And then the marks I've made in the monoprint will then translate into aquatint or sugar lift, to kind of build up those layers as well. And that's kind of why I love etching, to be honest, is the fact that you can keep dipping it in and out the acid multiple times to build up these scenes that can draw you in because of the sense of light and dark.
And so is that the advantage for you of translating this imagery into etching? Is that it allows you to explore a different process that has more depth and kind of more layers of process in it?
Yes, yeah. And obviously with the planographic processes, it is just it's a flat image. So, but with an etching, obviously the paper's going into all the incised lines that you've created. So when it's printed, it's almost like, if you do a deep bite, you get this beautiful braille on the paper. And that's kind of why I love etching. And again, it's alchemy. But that's no different to lithography, where you're manipulating a stone with acid to create a printing surface. Um, they're both kind of got this magical quality to them.
Mhm. Fantastic. And if I click through the next one,
So this is kind of a recent project that I've been commissioned to do, which has been a really wonderful project to be involved in, where I was invited to go into an abandoned graphic packaging company in Bristol and record the space. And um, the commission was to then make a series of work which would then get blown up and put on the hoardings outside, to basically um, n- they're basically these huge grey kind of hoardings. So I kind of mixed up the design with my own work, with community workshops. So I do a lot of kind of community work as well, where I work with disadvantaged groups and do printmaking with them. So that's been a really fun project since I've been back from Venice to be a part of, and the final phase is just finishing now. But from this kind of being in a space, being allowed to draw, I've then further gone on to do like etchings off that building. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment in terms of my practice, is working on this commission and also responding to my trip in the summer from the residency in Venice and time in the mountains.
and presumably we'll be able to see the outcome from that from this project on
Yeah. So
campus.
the phase one actually is already complete. So I did a phase one, which was working with um different groups in the community in East Bristol, and then I've just finished another phase. Well, it's being developed now, digitally, which was working with 10 I had 10 workshops for 5 and 6 year olds drawing, which was a bit bonkers. But I don't know if you've done any workshops with 5 year olds, Jake, but like seeing 5 year olds draw is pretty magic because they just go for it. They've got no preconceived ideas. It's super loose, and it's like really inspiring to then go back to my studio and just be like, I'm just going to draw like a 5 year old because there's so much energy and life to them.
And I totally get sort of Picasso's phrase of, sort of wanting to return to that kind of childlike excitement about drawing and making work. Yeah, it's a lifetime's aspiration to learn to draw like a child again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of what I've been trying to do the last 2 weeks, is just kind of get rid of any kind of formal training and just draw. It's
Mhm.
like, yeah, like a child. Um, and the next slide, I think it's the one where, so these are like kind of some of the final etchings that I made from the internal space of the graphic packaging company, which they're like their old they're litho printers, and they've moved factory, and they're kind of one of the world's largest lithographic packaging companies in the world. Um, so they print packaging for Coca-Cola, for Stella, like so many, like Kellogg's cornflakes. They've got really big kind of names under their belt. Um, and it's quite funny to then kind of be recording like an old lithographic printmaker's um yeah, kind of space.
I think there's often an assumption that everything is digitally printed now, everything commercial, and actually there's a lot of commercial lithographic printmaking still going on that has a parallel with fine art printmaking.
Yeah, exactly. Because they still use, so they will use the same materials that I use when I do a photo plate. It's just that they're using it at a high speed. You know, their machines print like a CMYK. They'll do like 100 and like I don't know, I don't know, it's something really bizarre, like something really quick, and you're like, how is that happening in front of my eyes? Is that rapid? And then there's me like in the studio printing like one an hour. So quite a contrast.
Um, and that brings us to the end of our slideshow.
Mm.
Thank you.
No worries at all.
I'm going to take us off of the screen share there. And I'm just going to give everyone the opportunity to ask questions because I see that there are a few that have come through. I also just wanted to note that when we share the recording from this, if anyone isn't familiar with some of the printmaking terminology that Gemma and I have been using, I'm just going to put some links through some little explainers that we've got as well, because it's definitely something that's kind of worth digging deeper into. But I also don't want to break your flow, Gemma, by sort of stopping with a little mini glossary all the time. So um, and it's really great just to kind of just to see the work, to see the difference as well between the monoprints in here and the etchings that you've made, but from similar subject matter. Um, can I throw some questions at you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I will say as well, if anyone else wants to ask questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and I will ask them of Gemma. So Fran has said, what was the last thing? So you mentioned make prints. Oh, after the open print project, let me just think. So um, that's going back to when we were looking at the work you were doing in the Alps.
Mm.
Perhaps I think that was just talking about the miniature press from the open print project. But Fran, do feel free to kind of jump in again if you can remember exactly what context that might have been. And Rachel said that she loves using the pasta machine for printmaking, so that's
Yeah.
good. We got
Yeah.
another
A winner. It's a winner.
another key one. And Gemini said, "How do you feel when you stand in front of abandoned buildings for the first time?"
Oh yeah, I get a really kind of giddy feeling. I'm like, oh, it's kind of this strange feeling of, will I get caught? And then I get inside and I'm like, oh, it's all a bit too visually overwhelming. And yeah, I then have to kind of I'll either, it depends. If it's a big space, then I'll do a lap and then I'll do another lap with like drawing in a camera. If it's a smaller space, then it's again it's kind of more intimate and um it's like it's all these what I love about abandoned spaces is the narratives that come into my mind once I'm there. So it's, why is it abandoned, what's happened to it, especially if it's a home like these old villas in northern Italy. It's like, well, why has this been left to completely fall into disrepair? Like, where's the family? What's happened to the family? I went to a whole abandoned village in northern Italy, like just outside Domodossola, and you're like, how? But it was transport links. They moved somewhere where there was more accessible to like a bigger city and a bigger town. Um, if it's a bigger space, then again, it might be that there's like a few spaces I've been into where um there's remnants of the past inhabitants. So there might be a cup or a locker with Dave on it. It's like, oh, I wonder who Dave was. Was he a nice person? And so like all these kind of it sparks so much of my imagination when I'm in these kind of in these derelict spaces. And then it's the awe of the nature reclaiming the space and seeing how powerful nature is in kind of turning what once was like a brownfield site or a massive industrial site back into a place of refuge for nature. So a lot of the quarries that I went into in the Peak District, they um one of them had like carpets of wild strawberries. There was buddleia, there's birds, there's all this kind of wildlife that's really kicking off. And you think, well, at least nature's kind of reclaiming them. It's kind of quite comforting in that aspect.
So it's only abandoned by people. It's not
Yeah.
abandoned by everything.
Not at all. No, no. Yeah.
I haven't had any further questions from anyone, so I will just say if anyone does want to throw anyone in. Oh, Sheila has actually asked about psychogeography. Um, so she's said, is that by happenstance or a conscious decision to follow that idea? But would you be able to tell us a bit more about psychogeography?
Yeah, it's I'm not quite sure when it was first coined, but quite a lot of there's a book. I'll have to remember the title of it. But it for me it's I do it. I guess I consciously know that I'm not going to follow a map when I go to somewhere new. I'm just going to meander, and that's kind of what psychogeography means. It's just walking without purpose. And often or not, that's when you start to discover all the kind of overlooked aspects of a city or a place. The kind of forgotten corners of an area. That's why I like doing it, because if you're following everyone else, yes, you might see some really interesting stuff, but actually the more interesting for me is the stuff that is kind of the back streets, or that's where all the grime is and the textures and the surfaces and the traces of the like proper trace of human inhabitants. Um, so yeah, I'd invite anyone to just give it a go. Like give it a go in your local kind of town. You might be surprised at what you'll discover.
Yeah, thank you. Franz actually asked if you could elaborate a bit more about touche puddling. I think she's mentioned about touche puddling in monotypes, but I think was it right there? It was just in your lithographs?
Yeah, yeah. So, I do think you can buy like liquid touche, but I've tried it and it's really not like you can buy it from like I can't remember the brand, but it's not all that great. But um, it's called Trilobite is what I use, and it comes in a paste format. But there's lots of different varieties of touche. But I've personally found that the paste is the best. So it comes in a tin, and then you pour in some distilled water and you make it into a paste, and then you dissolve that into certain quantities of distilled water further to get light, medium, or dark. And then when you puddle that onto a stone, you let it dry, the grease kind of reacts and it will start to create these beautiful contour marks when it dries. And like you can't get that in etching, you can't get that in relief printmaking or anything else really. So it's a distinct quality to stone lithography, but you can also do it on mark resist and expose photo plate lithos as well and
Mhm.
get those lovely marks and textures. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Um, Brilliant. Well, it has been wonderful, Gemma, to hear so much about your process, all the way from the experience of spaces into the development of those monotypes and then into the development of more substantial lithographs and etchings. It's just really exciting to kind of see all of those different steps that are kind of informing the work that you've made. I know that you've got in-person workshops coming up. Nina's asked whether you run any online workshops. Do you?
Well, potentially because so me and Vicky were obviously going to be sharing a space together, and for years we've been wanting to develop a series of DIY printmaking videos. So watch the space. So hopefully soon.
And
Yeah.
is it better to follow your Instagram to keep up on what you do, or are there better places to follow what you're up to?
Instagram, or if you go onto my website and subscribe to my newsletter, then I tend to, um, I don't bombard people, maybe like once every 2 months. I might post about what workshops are coming up or exhibitions.
Excellent. I'm just going to pop a link in the chat just to your website there. So if anyone wants to click through to Gemma's website, do sign up to her newsletter. And that will have some details of the workshops that you've got coming up with Bristol Print Collective in person, will
Yeah.
it?
Yes, yeah, yeah. I've got there's like a whole I'm doing a whole day monoprint workshop on the 7th of June, I think it is. And then I've got some, yeah, more like kind of sugar lift intaglio weekend workshops a bit further in the summer.
Fantastic, thank you. I'll put some links, everyone, as well when I share the recording from this session. So I'll put some links to all of those in there as well. And then you've got work on show in Printfest in Cumbria and Print in Action in Plymouth. Is that right? Coming up this year?
That's correct. And if you're in London, then I've got the like the Royal Society of Painter Printmakers. We have our annual show, which is in May. So that'll be at the Bankside Gallery. So I'll have work at the Bankside Gallery as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gemma. It's been such a pleasure to hear from you.
Thank you for the invitation.
It has been great. And for everyone that's joined us, thank you for coming along. Thank you for listening. For all of our Patreon supporters as well, thank you for supporting what we do. So all of these monthly talks are funded by our Patreon supporters, but we try and make them available to absolutely everybody. So I'll put the recording of this talk up on our YouTube in the next few days, and then I'll share that via Patreon and via our social media. And please do share it as widely as you can. It's a lovely way to spread the good word of printmaking as well, and to let people know a bit more about Gemma's work. Gemma, thank you.
No, thank you
It's
very
been
much.
a joy, and thank you all for coming. And hope.